to join me in prayerful consciousness. There is a power in this universe greater than we are for good that we can use. And today I would invite you to imagine what it is that you need to release in order to grab a hold of that power, to align with it, to know that it is there for you. Whatever it is that you are looking to heal or to achieve or to overcome, transcend, transform, whatever the next step of your evolutionary journey is, Spirit is there. Spirit is there just waiting for us to release into it fully, to recognize our own divinity, to recognize the fact that we are children of God, and we live in a loving universe, a universe that is opening up to us. Whatever that distant star is, whatever that bit of sunlight is, Spirit is there to move us towards that. So imagine with me just for a moment of what it is to fully release into that power, to fully release into God. To fully let go and to let God. To fully let go and let God. To fully let go and let God. Allowing that still small voice to guide and direct you. That bit of spirit that you live with inside of you. That glorious child of God that you are. Let go and let God. And so it is. I'd like to add to Eloise's wonderful prayer that my voice holds through this endeavor. And that I don't sneeze all over you guys. Okay. Eloise's prayer is just a beautiful prayer. I was sitting there, and sometimes when you're going to do a talk, a class, anything, you do your work, you do your prep work during the week, you think about it, and sometimes there's so much information that you wonder, okay, where's the starting place? Where do I start with this? And I've been sitting here today thinking about this, and Eloise just opened it up perfectly. Her imagery of going to, coming to California, and the freedom that represented. And today we're thinking about the idea of migration, we're looking at the West, metaphorically what the West represents in the four directions, and it represents migration, and ultimately it represents freedom. Whenever we look at migrations that have taken place down through history, they've always been about freedom. They've always been moving into a larger expanse, and she did such a great job of that, and I was just thinking what that means metaphorically. And the power of freedom, the power of migration. Freedom basically says, I can move into a place of healing. I can move into a place from going to moving beyond where I am right now, which is not a good place. Or I can go and I can create something. I can transform something. I can be something. In metaphysics, we call it the divine urge. It is that thing that wells up within us. That through the tears, through the sorrow, through whatever it is, there is that voice, that feeling that I can move beyond this, or I desire to move beyond this. I don't want to live this way anymore, or I want to create something, or I want to make something, or I want to be something. It is that divine urge. And so in the idea of migration, the idea of moving forward, the idea of transcending, transforming, healing, is such a powerful idea in spirituality. I mean, I would argue that if you boil down all of religion and you boil down all of spirituality, that's really what it's all about. In fact, this idea is so powerful that, I don't know if you knew this or not, but in the earliest days of Buddhism, and I'm talking about, say, for a couple of hundred years, I think, give or take, when Buddhism began to spread, most of us today associate Buddhism with all kinds of icons. In fact, I would argue that as a belief system, that it's probably has more icons out there than anything else. The Buddha in our garden, the Buddha in our windowsill, the Buddha on our dashboard. It's become a decorative item, and we all know of the slender, serene Buddha. We know of the standing Buddha. We know of the sitting Buddha. We even know there's a little round, kind of rotund gentleman that's referred to Buddha sometimes. But I don't know if you knew this, but for the first couple of hundred years, Buddhism did not allow any icons of a physical Buddha to be produced. In fact, the only symbol that they had for their teaching was the lotus blossom. And that was it. The reason that we ended up with all of our Buddhas today is because at that particular time the Greco-Roman thing was going on, and in the trade routes the Greco-Romans loved to reproduce icons of their gods, and there were some people in Buddhism who thought, how can a lotus blossom, compete with all these great gods, so we need to come up with something to be part of the marketplace. It was all a marketing scheme. So we end up with all these Buddhas, and within their own right, I don't want to make light of them, they do represent ideas and represent higher consciousness. But the lotus blossom, why was the lotus blossom so revered in Buddhism, and why was it the main symbol that they grabbed a hold of? In fact, this symbol was so powerful that in Tibet, there are no native lotus plants that live there. They can't live in that climate. But if you look at Tibetan art, and especially Buddhist art, it's full of lotus blossoms. There is something that is very inspiring about the lotus blossom. And what is that? Well, I would argue that the lotus blossom represents migration. So let's think about that for a moment. The lotus blossom, the lotus plant, begins its life on the muddy floor of some really irky, murky, sometimes stagnant water, down there in the mud. And so imagine for a moment this lotus plant, what will be the lotus blossom, looking up from that mud, up through that water, that stagnant water. And somewhere up there is a bit of sunlight, just a bit. That lotus plant is down there in the material, in the weightiness of the physical life. The physical life. The physical life where sometimes we can feel insecure, sometimes we have low self-esteem, sometimes we have encountered traumas. Sometimes family members have done things, sometimes things haven't gone very well, and we are down there in this material physical world. And we are looking up through the cloudy water, but somewhere up there is hope. Somewhere up there is transcendence. Somewhere up there is healing. And so we begin our journey to literally reach out each and every day, just a little bit at a time, to reach towards that surface, that sunlight. And along the way, as we move up, we are gathering nutrients from that stagnant water, that muddy water. And even though it's difficult to live in, we are gaining everything that we need to reach up towards the sunlight. And so we grow up, we continue to move through it, we continue on our migration. The water in this scenario represents the migration, the place that we are heading, the journey that we are on to go towards our destination. And it means that this plant has to dedicate itself each and every day to reach towards the sun and to take in what it needs. Until finally one day, the plant breaks through the water surface, and then one of the most beautiful blossoms in the world comes forward, opens itself up. And that in Buddhism is called enlightenment or awareness. And what is enlightenment or awareness? It's coming to that place of healing, that place of transformation, that place of transcendence. Opening up to the warmth of the sun. And how beautiful the sky must be to the lotus flower as it finally moves beyond where it is. That's the migration of spirituality. And basically what it says is, if we think about, now this is the third direction we've talked about. We started in the east, we went to the south, now we're in the west. Remember, in the east, something grabbed our attention. It was that shiny thing. It grabbed our attention, and we went towards it. We never saw the world quite the same way. It was that book, it was that idea, it was that piece of art, it was that piece of music, it was something that grabbed our attention. Then we moved into the south and we began to fuel our passions for whatever it was and dedicate ourselves to dreaming what it is to be healed, to dreaming what it is to construct or transform or to make. And so now we come to the West, and the West is the commitment. The West is the migration. Eloise talked about in her treatment about migrating west, coming to California. And our ancestors for millions of years, thousands of years have been migrating. And if you think about the migration itself, very often if you think about a movie, we'll see, Uncle Bill, get on the train in New York, and then the next scene he gets off the train in California. But the fact of the matter is migration is a process. Migration is a commitment. Just like the lotus blossom, it's a commitment to taking in all of those nutrients all the way up. It's a commitment to be alive, to stay alive, to reach out, to do the growing that it has to do on any given day. It's a commitment to the end of the journey. I remember, we have these kind of educational, academic exercises sometimes where sometimes people who are training to become something, right? They want to become a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, or something. So they're in college, they're taking classes, and one day, one of the professors in college will actually bring someone in who is doing that. They are an attorney, they are a doctor, they are an accountant. And all the students in the classroom with their bright eyes and all of their ideals and their little number 2 pencils and now their iPads and stuff, and they almost come out of their seats because this is what I want to be, this is what I want to become. And so the person walks in, and right away the questions are, what is it like? What is it like to be who you are and what you are? What did it take? I remember when I was in training to be a minister, one of the last pieces of what I was going through was an intensive down in Monterey, which is a week long. And so for a week you're in a room, for a whole week you're in a room for 8 or 9 hours, and they parade all these ministers and other people in to tell you all kinds of things and maybe try and talk you out of it or whatever they're doing. Anyway, they come through. So there's a whole room full of people, and in our movement, as you know, if you read Science of Mind magazine and Creative Thought, you'll see that a lot of ministers have Dr. Whoever. Well, all these doctors you're reading, those are sort of in-house promotions, so to speak, and what that means is those are honorary titles for the most part of these ministers. So someone came through, and they were a doctor somebody, and someone in the group, and I don't know how many of us there were, I don't know, somewhere between 20 and 40 of us in this room. I think closer to 40. So the person was doing their thing and talking, and at the end they said, are there any questions about whatever it is they were talking about? And someone said, how is it that you became a doctor? How did you get that title doctor? And all that enthusiasm, right? And the person said, well, I'll be honest with you. It took cleaning toilets. It took rearranging a lot of furniture. It took going to a lot of board meetings. It took making sure, being the first one to show up and the last one to leave. It took worrying about the finances. It took, when the septic tank went out, I had to call a plumber so that we could do Sunday. In other words, it took the commitment. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't glamorous. It was what you have to do. It's what you have to do in terms of fueling that passion, in terms of getting somewhere. A few years ago, 60 Minutes did a program, and they profiled the Rolling Stones. So we think about the Rolling Stones. So, let's do the academic study. A lot of us sit there and we go, oh my God, what is it to be a rock star? Tell me, Mick Jagger, what is it to be a rock star? The Rolling Stones, who've been around for 50 years, right? That's weird, a rock star for 50 years. A rock star on Social Security. Okay. Anyway, so they were profiling this, and Mick Jagger, who is the Rolling Stones, basically, he's the cornerstone of the Rolling Stones. Okay. How can a stone with corners roll? I don't know. Anyway. So they showed, okay, so what do you think of when you think of Mick Jagger? You think of a guy who goes out on stage and he struts around and he sings these songs and he tours the world and he makes albums and he's got all kinds of people who are in love with him and want him, and sometimes people throw their underwear at him and all kinds of stuff like that. So we know that about Mick Jagger. But there was one piece where there was a guy whose job it was to run an arena. Okay, it was like Madison Square Garden or the Superdome or someplace. And the Rolling Stones were going to come through. So the guy who manages the building, whenever acts come through, whether it's a rock and roll act, a circus, hockey, whatever it is, there's always someone who comes in and has a meeting and says, okay, what are we going to do here? We got to talk about the money, we got to write the checks, we got to figure out what's going on. It's kind of a mundane task, right? So the gentleman who ran this arena, he was used to dealing with people who do these mundane tasks. And so pretty soon there's a knock on the door, and he knows that someone from the Rolling Stones is going to be there to set everything up. And sure enough, who walks through the door in his little conservative suit and tie was Mick Jagger. You see, the Mick Jagger that you don't see on stage. The Mick Jagger who says basically, this is my band, it's my business, and I have to deal with all the details. I want to know what the seating's like, I want to know what the heating's like, I want to know what the stage is like, I want to know what the finances are like. I will sign the check, I will talk to you, I will set it up, because that's what I have to do. When we think about migration, as what Eloise talked about in her prayer, think for a moment, think of whatever migration you want to think of, all of our ancestors, those of us who had ancestors who came west or came from one country to another or whatever, day in, day out. There is this great idea that they started in a place like the lotus plant on the bottom of the pond, looking up at that sunlight somewhere, wanting freedom, wanting to express, wanting to be somewhere, wanting to live somewhere. There is that idea. And so they start the journey, but along the way, imagine what they did. Imagine the campfires they built. Imagine the cooking they did. Imagine dealing with the animals. Imagine fixing things that broke along the way. Gathering, hunting, taking care of themselves, bathing, taking care of the children. All those things that go into the freedom part of it. This is why Buddhism revered the lotus blossom so much, is because what Buddhism understands is that in order to achieve something, in order to move beyond that thing in our life that we so desperately want to heal, in order to move into that place we want to be, in order to create, in order to transform, in order to transcend, it takes that daily commitment to the work. It's a commitment kind of situation. That every single day there is that march to the horizon, and there is what I need to do today to be able to do that. So, what are we talking about in terms of spirituality? Why are we drawn to walk into a church on a Sunday morning? Why are we drawn to take a class? Why are we drawn to read a book? Why are we drawn to go online and listen to somebody speak? Because we want our life to be better. Because we want to accomplish those things. Because we want to do something with that divine urge. Because, like the lotus blossom, we want to open up to the sunlight of whatever it is. Whatever it is. And what the Buddhist Dharma teaches, which is what every single spiritual philosophy worth its salt teaches, is it means every day to wake up, suit up, show up, and do the work. In metaphysics, in New Thought, we don't believe that there is someone or something that's going to do it for you. Like Louise Hay, one of our beloved teachers, when she was working with people who so desperately were looking for a healing, she said, would you like to meet a Messiah? Yes, I'd like to meet a Messiah. I'd like to meet that person who's going to do it for me. And she holds up a mirror. What do you say to the Messiah? It doesn't mean that there isn't a power of God to be there for us. It doesn't mean that we're completely on our own. In our belief system, we say there is a power in this universe for good greater than we are that we can use. That we can use. Just like for the lotus plant that starts off in the mud in the bottom of that pond, there is a power in the universe greater than it is that it can use. But it says that it can use. Not that it's going to do it for it, or it's going to do it for us. Spirituality, to walk the spiritual path is a daily kind of commitment. Because for whatever reason, and I teach a lot of classes, and I love the classes because, in fact, I'm kind of not even comfortable saying I teach classes. I think I participate in classes, because a really good class, in my opinion, is a completely a community effort, a group effort. So I show up for classes, and very often the question comes up, why is it that we have created this world? Because we in metaphysics believe, this world that we're living in right now, we created it. We were there. This world is an outpicturing of our consciousness, everything about it. Once upon a time when the Big Bang happened and the universe went into fruition, we were there in consciousness, because if we believe that we are eternal beings, doesn't mean that we're alive just after we die or make our transition. It means we have always been here. Wrap your mind around that. But the fact of the matter is, in consciousness, we created this world. And so some people will say, well, why did we create the world we did? In other words, why is it that the lotus plant created that muddy bottom, created that Urky water and created that entire process, which is, I mean, let's boil it down, a process of struggle, right? A process, I have never met anyone who has lived a life who has not gone through some stuff. I have never met anyone who hasn't waken up on a morning and said, oh my God, I don't know if I can handle this. Show me that person. I don't know who they are. So why did we create it? And the answer to that is that imagine the beauty of that lotus blossom. And at some level, that lotus blossom says, in order for me to be really, really, really beautiful, this is what I need to do. In order for me to really appreciate the freedom that I achieved through migration, I need to go through something to really appreciate that beauty, to appreciate that freedom. We all know, when we read books, when we watch movies, whatever we do, when we listen to people talk, we know that those who have been denied something or been through something are much more appreciative of what they've achieved. Those who, again, Eloise talked about migration. Imagine those who came to this country from places in Eastern Europe where there was no freedom. Imagine people who were able to start their own businesses who had spent times in sweatshops. Imagine people who felt the warmth of the sun on their face, who had been in places that were cold and dark. Imagine how beautiful it's going to be when you can move beyond the sadness and the tears. When you can move beyond the sadness and the tears. In other words, we have created the muddy bottom. We have created the muddy water in order to fully come into the warmth and the beauty of the light. But that takes a commitment. In spirituality, it's called spiritual practice. It's called being willing to get up every day and do what that lotus plant has to do in that water, to take in what it has to take in. I quoted for you earlier when I started the service an anonymous Dharma teacher who goes on to say, the pattern of growth signifies, and this is of the lotus blossom, the pattern of growth signifies the progress of the soul from the mud of materialism through the waters of spiritual experience and into the bright sunshine of enlightenment. And this coincides with what Ernest Holmes said when he said, we must make our own journey into righteousness. We must make our own journey into righteousness. And so, that journey is about commitment. That journey is about showing up. Yesterday we had a board meeting like we do once a month. And one of the things, getting ready for this week and things have been going on, what's amazing to me, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this on all kinds of different levels, is sitting down in a room full of people who are so absolutely committed to something, who just show up, no matter what. You want to talk about plumbing, you want to talk about the roof, you want to talk about the parking lot, you want to talk about the chairs, and they're all there. They're all in, man. They're into it. They love it. They love talking about sewers and stuff. Because that's where we live. That's a daily kind of commitment. And what I've experienced in my own life, because I'm gonna, I don't want to say anything that sounds judgmental, and so I want to say I'm right here too. It's my life as well. But what I've experienced since I've become a minister is that those people who are not committed to a daily spiritual practice, when things get really rough, it gets really rough. We wonder why sometimes we see people harm themselves. We wonder why sometimes we see people take their lives into really sort of dead-end directions. And what the great teachers tell us, and what the example of the lotus blossom tells us, it's because, unfortunately, there has not been a daily commitment to a practice. There has not been a daily commitment to what it takes to rise up and open up to the warmth of the sun. It's like this sinner. If there's not a commitment from a certain group of people, then this sinner is not going to make it. If I don't have a daily commitment to where I'm trying to go in my life, chances are I'm going to go off into some really bad places. But what I love about this is the promise of what Eloise talked about, of the freedom. Isn't that a beautiful thing? The promise of, somewhere within the consciousness of that lotus blossom. And I'm not even really reaching into metaphor here, because I believe that there is a level of intelligence and consciousness within that plant that is so completely drawn to the promise of that warm, beautiful sunshine, and just can't wait until it can open itself up and feel that life can be better. That life will be better. There is a power in the universe greater than we are for good that we can use. That we can use. In one of the classes I'm involved in right now, we talked about the idea that New Thought in metaphysics is referred to as spiritual psychology. And the question that we came up with, how is that different than, say, secular psychology? And I have nothing but respect for psychology. But the main difference is that in spiritual psychology, there is always the premise of how is it that we can open ourselves up to the warmth of the sun. That's the premise going in. Yeah, you can do all the work about childhood and all the things that happen and what makes us who we are. But in spiritual psychology, there is always the premise of what it is and what it will take to open up to the light of the sun. And I love that. That's one of the reasons I am so drawn to this teaching. Because whether it's a practitioner, a prayer partner, a minister, a good spiritual friend, when we sit down and we're in the depths of it, there has to be that idea sitting there with us, that there is a way to open up to the warmth of the sun. There is a way to heal this. What's the definition of healing? Hey, that's the personal thing. I have no idea. Healing is subjective. Healing is personal. Healing is what it is. But what I will stand by is that healing can take place. Healing can take place. I don't care. I don't care how dire it is. I don't care how dark it is. I don't care how nasty and muddy and murky the water is. Healing can take place. And that's a premise from which we work. That's what the migration is. Over that horizon is a better place. Up there above the water is happiness, contentment, understanding. Something that will warm me as I open up to it. I want to leave you this morning with something from a gentleman by the name of Wayne Kritzberg. And Wayne Kritzberg basically says that this journey that we're on, this migration, this commitment, is an outgrowth of discipline, a personal discipline. So Wayne Kritzberg makes a very personal kind of statement. He said, "Discipline gives me the resolve not to take the easy way out. Taking direct action, no matter how challenging, brings me tremendous freedom. Through that freedom, I'm truly able to face the world with a clean and joyous heart." You know, the lotus blossom doesn't have an easy way out. But when it opens up, it is a clean and joyous heart. And there is nothing more beautiful than a lotus blossom. So I would invite you to join me in the consciousness of prayer this morning. I know the Spirit is truly all there is. And I also know that whatever challenges that we may face and whatever we may go through, as we commit to the outcome of healing, Spirit is as committed as we are. And with us every step of the way. So today I am so grateful for all of the lotus blossoms that are here today, moving through what sometimes feels like those dark and nasty waters of the material world into the light and the warmth and the sun of Spirit. And I am so grateful for that. So grateful for the promise of Spirit showing up in just exactly the way that we desire that Spirit show up. So in my gratitude for this, I let my word go, knowing that it's so, and so it is. All right.